In previous sessions, we've explored some of the different generosities Mary has shown by anointing Jesus' feet. She's been generous with her time, her attention, her wealth, and her talents. Next, we will explore another of her inspirational generosities, generosity with her possessions. I was training some people on encouraging generosity a while ago and asked them what they had thought of when they heard the word generosity. One person replied, "I hate the word generosity." As you can see, that response stayed with me. If I remember aright, it led to a discussion about what generosity actually means. It can be one of those words which can seem to cover any vaguely altruistic act. But is it really generous to put some loose change in a charity collection box? Or to round up a restaurant bill with a donation to a charity? On a practical level, is helping with a coffee rota generous? Well, not when I do it for sure. I did it so badly I've never been asked back. But when we say thank you for your generosity, could it always really be classed as truly generous? This whole issue of what generosity looks like is particularly important when looking at Mary's net generosity, generous with possessions. It seems reasonable to assume that the nard that Mary used was a treasured possession. The cost of the nard is one thing, but my hunch is it was about much more than that, and the using of a treasured possession was part of the significance of the act. Using it all was important too. It was lavish, generous, even extravagant. All the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. In the past, I've had on my notice board two stark quotes about generosity and possessions. The first is from the book The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver. True generosity entails no recompense. It means giving up something you fiercely value and cannot replace. Something you fiercely value. My sense is that Mary fiercely valued the nard, and it could not be replaced. It feels like true generosity to me. The second quote is from Albert Schweitzer. If you own something you cannot give away, then you don't own it, it owns you. It's a quote that makes me feel uncomfortable, because I feel I should agree with it, but I fight against it often enough. I like to think there's another option, that we can have things we cannot give away, and yet they don't own us. I've been trying to find that other option over several decades, but I'm not sure it exists. This quote by Schweitzer echoes so much of Jesus' teaching on generosity, an explicit call to be wary of the power of possessions. In Luke 12, Jesus says, "Watch out! Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Later in the chapter, he says, "Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourself that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys." It's pretty unequivocal. Possessions can have a particular hold on us, and so being generous with them can be a particularly powerful witness to our faith and belief in God's particular economy. Like being generous with money, it's a profoundly countercultural act. It's an exaggeration to say we live in a society that lives by the mantra, "you are what you own," but it's not that much of an exaggeration. What we possess is often seen as a key indicator of the kind of person we are, what aspirations we have, what we value, and, to be honest, the extent to which we conform with social expectations. If we give away what we have, it's a profoundly countercultural act. It's an acknowledgement of faith, a belief that everything comes from God and that we are called to share what we have in the way that God would want. It can also be a liberation, as Albert Schweitzer suggests. It's easy to fall under the tyranny of things where, without realizing it, our lives become dominated by the accumulation of possessions. As painful as it can be to give up some of our possessions, it can also be liberating, as we feel less encumbered, less weighed down, lighter. Sometimes this can be literally true. The legend of St. Martin of Tours shows the power of being generous with our possessions. He's a soldier in the Roman army outside Amiens in France. He sees a beggar shivering in the cold and instinctively cuts his own cloak in half and gives it to the beggar. That night he has a vision where he sees Jesus wearing the half of the cloak he has given away. It's a clear echo of Matthew 25, where Jesus tells of the judgment of the nations. He says that those in God's kingdom gave him food and drink. They welcomed him and clothed him. When the people ask how they had done these things for Jesus, he says, "Just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." As we become more and more a cashless society, where money is only ever seen as a number on an app or a computer screen, there is something compelling about the physicality of being generous with possessions. Understandably, we find it much easier to give away things which no longer have a use or meaning to us. But as Mary shows, true generosity is when we give away something we fiercely value and cannot replace. Mary had lost and then found her beloved brother. Compared to that, material possessions were insignificant to her. She generously gave away a treasured possession, and in doing so showed her faith and love for Jesus. By giving away some of what we have, we can do the same.